Hey everyone, Cleo here, welcome to my channel, and today I am doing my wrap up for the month of January. Yes, my hair is still wet, but sadly I have long hair, I have thick hair, it takes for ages for it to dry, and at the moment we are working with limited daytime, so it is still the middle of the day, I still have plenty of time, but I know that if I wait for this hair to dry, it'll be gone. So I'm working with this wonderful midday light. So without further ado, let's dive into it. So for 2020 I'm changing the format of my wrap up a little bit, so I'll be talking about all the books that I've finished in the month that I'm discussing, but I'll also be giving you a book haul at the end of the video, unless I didn't haul any books. So one of the goals for 2020 was to read more of my unread books on the shelves, and so as a consequence I want to be giving you an update on this at the end of every video. So I'll be talking about how many of the books that I read that month are unread books from my shelves, so how many unread books have gone out, so to speak, and then I'll be giving you an overview of the books that I bought that month to be showing you which books went into my unread bookshelves. So let's dive into the books. So in the month of January I gave myself a secret TBR, and that was to read all of the books under 200 pages that were on my unfinished books that were on these shelves. So I will be going through these in order of reading experience. So I also, in the order in which I read them. I also have another video up, I will link it down below, in which I gave you, which is really like my reading vlog about this experience, in which I tell you the setup for the months, like which books I was intending to read, and the reading experience with them. So if you want to see that, or if you after seeing this video want more information about my thoughts while reading these books, then definitely also do check that video out. So first book that I read this month is one of the shortest one, and I just really wanted to get like a productive go into my year by immediately reading the shortest one on there. Also just because I had just filmed my best books of 2020 video, and this author was on there, and that is Tolstoy. So this is How Much Land Does a Man Need? This is a short story by Tolstoy, and in full disclosure there are actually two short stories in there. The second one is What Men Live By. I do definitely think that How Much Land Does a Man Need is the really interesting one. So How Much Land Does a Man Need is a sort of like parable. It's a story about a sort of a family that is kind of tempting fate by saying that like if they just had a little bit more land, then I mean even the devil could come and claim them and they wouldn't care, something like that. I don't really exactly remember what they said, but they taunted the devil in a way, and so the devil was saying like, okay, sure, fine, you think that that is the case, let's try you out. And then the story very much like shows how you keep on wanting more and more and more, and so like how much man does a man actually need, because every single time that you have a little bit more land you want even more lands. So I really like that short story, and the second part was What Men Live By. It was a little bit more religious, which was less like my thing. Yeah, now I remember what it was about. Yeah, the second story, it was nice, but it wasn't really my thing. It was a little bit too much on the religious side for me. And so that was the first book for the month. I think I gave it 4 stars in total, and that's mainly to do with the first story. And that's mainly like my rating for the first story actually. Then I finished my first 5-star read for the year, which I was very happy with, and that is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. So I had really good luck with my Japanese literature in the month of January. I say that as if you can have bad luck with it. I guess you can have, but I have never, I think, had bad luck with Japanese literature. I've loved every single Japanese literary work that I've read. High claim, but I think it's correct. But so The Housekeeper and the Professor, we are following a housekeeper who is she's given a new assignment, and her new assignment is to take care of this professor. And like this is sort of system where like every time a housekeeper needs to be changed, this is sort of like a mark against the patient. And this guy has got like so many marks against him because so many housekeepers have kind of run out on him. And so the housekeeper's kind of intrigued what is happening there. But it turns out that the professor just has 80 minutes of memory. So after 80 minutes, so if you haven't seen him for 80 minutes, for example, he will forget all about you. If you stay in his life, he will see you, he will remember you, for example. So he has all of these notes pasted on his outfits, for example, for crucial things that he needs to remember. first one being that he only has a memory of 80 minutes, something important to remember. And he's a professor of mathematics, and this story is a very nice interwovenness of like this development of a relationship between this housekeeper and the professor, and then later on also her son, despite the fact that yeah, there's not really a lot of memory that can be built in the way that you can form relationships without there actually being memories, combined memories between the two people. And it's also interwoven with a lot of like mathematical facts, which were very interesting. It was very fun to look at like the way that mathematics was used in this book, and I really liked it. I think the one thing that I was like that kind of disappointed me in a way is that I felt like there was a very strong reaction from the professor relating to children, and so I was thinking that there was something in his past or something, like he had lost a child or something, or something like that, and this never, I mean, there was never anything said about that or anything like that, so it's this preoccupation of the professor with children is never explained or anything like that, and probably that doesn't need to be explained, but for me I was really expecting there to be something, so in that sense it was a little bit of a disappointment, but I still gave it 5 stars because it definitely wasn't like the main focus of the book, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it throughout. Definitely think it's an author worth reading. She also has a new book, The Memory Police, which I've been hearing a lot of people say wonderful things about, so definitely to check this author out, definitely if you're into Japanese literature. Next up, I read the first book in a series of unfortunate events, The Bad Beginning. So I have all 13 books of a series of unfortunate events in this edition, but I have never read them. I have read the first few, which I realized while reading them actually. So I've read the first few, never got through them, and so I definitely wanted to give them another go now, decide on them, whether I wanted to keep them or not. Spoiler alert, I will be finishing this series, or at least going a little bit further in this series than I have in this month, before I make up my mind. So The Bad Beginning, a series of unfortunate events. We are following 3 young children who are orphaned at the beginning of the book. They are sent to live with Count Olaf, but soon realize that Count Olaf is a horrible man and that he is after their fortune, but their fortune will only be available once Violet, the eldest of the children, comes of age. And throughout the series we will see Count Olaf trying to gain access to their fortune. And so these first 4 books, I will talk about them all together I think at this point. So these first four books are very much formulaic. They very much follow a certain sort of pattern in the book, in which these children are immediately seeing that Count Olaf is in their life. They're trying to tell the adults, and the adults are like, but no, that's not Count Olaf, because Count Olaf looks like this, and they're like, yeah, but he's in disguise. No, you're just seeing ghosts. And then at the end of each book they unmask him, and then the adults are like, oh, that's Count Olaf, who knew, and things like that. And so it's very much about adults not listening to children, and but I've been told that this kind of changes throughout the series. So in these first 4 books we're still very much following that formula. We have seen some breaches of the formula in the 4th book, and so the 4th book is actually the book that I've enjoyed the most so far. So the 1st and the 2nd were a little bit of a slog to get through, also because I think I already read them at some point. 3rd book was already getting a little bit better for me. 4th book definitely was better because it broke the formula a little bit, not entirely, but I saw a video of somebody recently who read all 13 books in 24 hours, and that really got me pumped to read them, also because she was saying how the first 4 books are very much still formulaic, and then afterwards there's a sort of like bigger overarching plot that develops, an overarching mystery. So I'm really looking forward to diving into the next books in this series and seeing whether I agree with that and whether that is enough to keep me going, because they are very fast reads, and so in a sense it would be a shame for me to just get rid of them rather than just try and read them. But of course, if I'm not going to be enjoying them, then definitely I will just get rid of them. But so far I didn't really enjoy the 1st and 2nd one because I already knew the plot, but I have definitely enjoyed the 4th one, so I definitely want to be continuing with them. So next up I read a book that I ended up not rating because I'm just unsure about my experience with this book, and that is Dear Friend from My Life I Write to You in Your Life by Yiyun. So this is actually a book of essays, which I didn't know in advance, and so I went into it expecting it to be a novel, expecting a sort of overarching story, and so I got lost in this quite a lot of times, and only after a while did I realize that it was actually standalone essays, but even within the essays I feel that there's a sort of like chaos and that I didn't necessarily always follow the flow of. On the other hand, I really did enjoy a lot of the things that she was saying. She was bringing up interesting points, there were a lot of good quotes in here, and I did really appreciate the things that she was bringing out. I just felt like there was a structural difficulty in reading this one that made me unsure about my reading experience with this. Like, I'm not sure how to rate it, you know. The easiest rating would be 3 because I'm unsure, but I've decided not to rate it. I do sometimes not rate books when I'm unsure whether about my experience with them, you know, when I don't really know what to give them, then I just leave them unrated, and I will be doing that for this one as well. I do perhaps want to reread it at some point, but I'll probably be reading another book by her very shortly, and so I'll make up my mind about her writing at that point, because in this book I definitely did enjoy her writing. Next up, second 5-star read of the month and of the year, and the second Japanese literary work, and that is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. Now, there have been very mixed reviews of this book, I feel, but for me this was an absolute win. So in Convenience Store Woman we are following our main character Keiko, who is a employee at a convenience store, and the convenience store is very much her life. You know, she has difficulties communicating with people, and in the convenience store she was given a training on how to greet people and how to deal with customers, giving video instructions, and she's kind of like mimicking the way people talk in the videos and things like that, and so she's kind of been given a manual on life, a manual on how to deal with people. And so the convenience store setting really works for her. She really is in tune with the convenience store, with the way that you know, supply and demand works. She's very much in tune also with things like the weather and how it might influence sales in their store and things like that. So this is very much a good setting for her, but it also puts her in a bit of a difficult situation because people look down on what she's doing, and so people in her life are always feeling like she should be moving on from this setting. Like, nobody in the convenience store makes a career out of working in a convenience store. They're just there for a temporary time until they get their footing in the job that they actually want to be doing. So people always also assume that she should be doing that. Also, she's a single woman in, I think, her 30s or something like that, and so there are also a lot of questions about that, like, you know, why haven't you found anybody and things like that. So it's very much about being on the outside of society, on expectations in society, the expectations to conform, and the difficulty of standing outside of that situation, which as a single 30-year-old woman I definitely enjoy, and I could relate to a lot of things in this book, not necessarily to the character in this book, because she is non-conform in every single way, it seems, you know, and so her difficulties in understanding people and understanding the way people's work definitely isn't something that I share with her. I definitely feel like I'm a little bit too much of an empath at times, for example, and she definitely has very difficulties in understanding social cues, for example, and things like that. So in that way I definitely didn't relate to her, but I definitely related to the whole thing of like family members asking you about relationships and expecting you to enter up into a relationship while you're perfectly happy being a single person. So this one definitely did work very well for me, and at the end of this year, I think in September, another book by Sayaka Murata is being translated into English. It's called Earthlings, and I'll definitely be reading that one as well. Next up is sadly one of the lesser enjoyable books of this month, and that is The Body Artist by Delillo. Let me just say, this was weird, and I like weird stuff sometimes, but this one, this really wasn't for me. So this was about a woman who, at the beginning of this book, she is living together with a man. They're having a very ordinary conversation at the breakfast table, and then that man dies. I don't remember at this point whether he committed suicide or not, and she starts to feel a presence in the house, and she finds a boy or a man, I'm not entirely sure, in her house, who seems to be like, it's unclear throughout the book whether this is an imaginary person, whether she is just imagining him, whether she whether she is putting like the spirit of her dead man into this imaginary person, whether there is actually somebody there or not. And it's very much a story about identity, about dealing with grief, with loss, and she's also what is called a body artist, so she transforms her body, and so it's very much looking at like identity and how she transforms her body, her identity throughout, but it really didn't work for me. So I was kind of bored throughout, lost throughout, and I listened to the audiobook because sometimes audiobooks help me when I'm kind of like struggling to understand what is going on, when I'm struggling to keep my attention to it. But for this one, that also didn't help me. So it just wasn't for me. I would be very interested in somebody who has also read this book to comment down below about their experience with this one, but for me it just didn't work, which is a shame, because I was like, this was sort of like my introduction into Don DeLillo's work, but I will probably give his work another go to see. But yeah, for me neither the style nor the story really worked for this one, so sadly it's not one of my favorites. Next up, I finished the second book of a series of unfortunate events, The Reptile Room. I won't go into it because I gave my full explanation earlier on. And then I finished The Beautiful Cassandra by Jane Austen. Now I was a bit disappointed in this one because I think it's a bit unfair of them to call it The Beautiful Cassandra, because it's actually a collection of 5 short stories, and Beautiful Cassandra is like only 7 pages out of this whole collection. So it was actually going to be easier to call it Jack and Alice, which is the longest short story in here. But I guess because of Beautiful Cassandra maybe has a little bit more renown to it, I don't know. But this is why I also didn't necessarily enjoy it that much, because all of these short stories were very, very short and they didn't really interrelate, but they are put together in a sort of bind up. So I think it's really just like an introduction to Jane Austen's writing style, but then I think it's better to read her novels rather than these short stories. So I didn't necessarily enjoy it all that much. I think it was a very nice example of Jane Austen's writing style, but better read one of her actual novels than this short story collection. Next up, I finished the third book in the series of unfortunate events, which was The White Window. This was actually longer than 200 pages, but since the fourth book is shorter than 200 pages, I also needed to finish this one. And then we end up with a book that was the most struggle to get through, actually, because I had the audiobook for The Body Artist. I did get through that relatively fast, even though I really wasn't enjoying that. With Calvino, it was a little bit of a different experience. So Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino is the book that took me the longest. It's 150 pages, and it is about cities and the way these cities are described, the way that we experience cities. And there were some very interesting points being made, but the structuring of this book was really what kept me from enjoying it. So we are being introduced to city after city. Usually these descriptions are only like 1 page, 2 pages long, and we are following one city after another. So we're not looking at events taking place in cities, for example. We're really just looking at a description of the city and another city and another city and another city, and then some overarching discussions between Marco Polo, who is describing all of these cities, and a great Chinese ruler about cities. But I think it is an interesting book, but because of the structure I didn't necessarily enjoy it. I think there were interesting points brought up, but they didn't really land because of the way that the book is structured. It would maybe have been more interesting to really have stories set in these different cities, and then kind of talk about the description of cities through these stories. So sadly that was a bit of a letdown for me, because If on a Winter's Night I Travel by Italo Calvino is one of my favorite books of all times, and so Invisible Cities sadly did not make it to that same like sort of benchmark for me. Next up, final Japanese novel for the month, and another hit. This time I didn't give it a 5-star rating, but it was still a solid 4, and that is Life for Sale by Yushio Mishima. This is a weird dreamlike book, so it's very much in the style of Murakami, where a lot of weird shit is happening and you're like, what's happening, why, what, huh? This is less weird in a sense. You're more able to follow the plot, but also still all of the things that are happening are very weird and very much like it's not realistic fiction in any case. You know, vampires are included in the plot, for example. But our main character at the beginning of this book has just failed a suicide attempt, and so he decides to put his life for sale and in that way continue his life, just let somebody else gain control over his life. So he sells his life multiple times due to circumstances that will be explained in the book, and we follow this sequence of events, and it leads him down some very interesting paths. At first my problem with this was that it also felt like somewhat sequential, so you had a life being sold and you had that story, and then this life would go back up for sale and then it was sold and you had that story, but there wasn't really an overarching thing to it. But at the second half of the book we get to a little bit more of the overarching stuff. It was an interesting look at like it was an interesting look at like the will to live through this story, but I do think like it missed something that kept it from being a 5-star for me. I think it was just a little bit too light, I guess, for that, for me to give it a 5-star rating. But I did definitely really enjoy it, and I would still recommend it. He also has another book, Something with a Sailor, which is available in the same edition that I have the Housekeeper and the Professor in, so I'll probably also be purchasing that book at some point. Getting down to the wire, so the final 2 days of January I finished the last 2 books for the month. First one is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This is a book that I've been dreading for a while. I've been wanting to read it because I definitely want to read some Virginia Woolf, but I've also been dreading reading Virginia Woolf because she writes in stream of consciousness. And at university I had to read 30 pages of Ulysses by James Joyce. I never got around to finishing them. I finished like 8 pages and then I would always be like, what am I reading? Because I would just like, my mind would just zone out because of the way that it was written. And so I was very much fearing that the same would happen with Miss Dalloway, but it definitely didn't. And I definitely also feel like the audiobook is a good ride because I started reading it physically and I was getting along with it perfectly well. I was still managing to grasp whatever I was reading and things like that, so I definitely would still say that it's not necessary to listen to it in audio. But then at some point I was like switching to audiobook because I was getting a little bit tired, and I was like, let's see if I can put on the audiobook and then maybe I can read a little bit longer while doing something else as well. And the audiobook just flowed so well and just made this experience even more flowy is all that I can come up with now, which is not even a word, but okay. So it made this very much, it really fit well with the style of this book. It fits very well with stream of consciousness to have an audiobook, and so I would definitely recommend it. I would say maybe to be careful with it. I'm not sure whether it was just my edition of this audiobook or whether something was going a bit funky with the app, but sometimes it would just repeat certain passages. So I would just be in sort of like full deja vu, and then I check the physical copy and it wasn't like that in the physical copy. So I'm not entirely sure about the audiobook recommendation in that sense, but I definitely loved the writing style for this. I didn't necessarily, I didn't give it 4 stars because of the story, but I really love the writing style, so I definitely want to be going into more Virginia Woolf's books. I definitely think that I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed looking at these different characters and this way of looking at English society at that time. I just didn't think it was grand enough to give it a 4 or 5-star rating in this case. And yeah, I also had problems with the ending. So it's an open ending. I love open endings, but we are ending not with our main character. We are ending, so at some point we end up with a bit of a like cliffhanger for our main character, and then the final 10 pages for it or something like that, we are following other people as they are wondering where she is, and we never find out. And I don't know, it just didn't work for me, that ending, for a reason. I guess maybe it's just because I wanted a little bit more of a closed ending, I don't know. Maybe I would have I guess I would have loved it if it would have ended if those final 10 pages wouldn't have been there, or if those final 10 pages would have been included before the cliffhanger ending with Mrs. Dalloway. But so that didn't really work for me, and that's another reason for me to put it at a 3-star rating. It's actually a 3.5-star rating and not at a 4-star rating. But I definitely enjoyed it, and I'm definitely intrigued to read more of Virginia Woolf's work. So I would definitely say, like, if you've been dreading going into this, if you have problems with stream of consciousness, maybe try this one, because I definitely feel like this is stream of consciousness that works for me. I really loved the writing style in this. And then the final book that I finished in this month is the 4th book in a series of unfortunate events, The Miserable Mill. So as I said before, this is the one that I enjoyed most so far, and so this is also because it's the only one, I think, of these 4 books that I hadn't read. I don't think I finished the 3rd one, but I had read part of the 3rd one, because the setting was familiar to me in any case. So I think that definitely also enhanced the experience, and also because they were doing certain things with, like, the formula that they had been using up until that point. They kind of broke from it a little bit in this book, so I really enjoyed that part of it. So these are the books that I finished in the month of January. So I don't know whether I said it at the beginning of the video, I hope I did, but so I will be including now also my haul into this video. So my goal was for this year is to get rid of a lot of unread books on my shelf. So I had 147 unread books on my shelf at the beginning of this month. I read 13 of those, but I added some. So I added 4 new books to my unread shelves, meaning that I only have, that in the end, at the end of this month, I have 138 unread books on my shelf. So the new books on my shelf are, first of all, Songs of Innocence and Experience by William Blake. This is a poetry collection of William Blake, and it's actually a collection in which you have the poem on this side and then the printed poem on that side. Because I went to an art exhibition in the Tate Britain in London, in which you could see William Blake's works. I actually didn't know that William Blake really also illustrated his own poetry and the works of others. But it was a really interesting exhibition, and I really loved seeing his works like that, and I'm very happy to have this collection of his poems with these very nice illustrations that he made himself with them as well. So this is a very short one, but I do definitely want to be taking my time with that one, because poetry really isn't given for me. I find it difficult to analyze poetry and things like that. I did analyze one of his poems when I was in university, which is Tiger Tiger, but I'm really looking forward to getting to the rest of his works. In a sort of similar strain, I have another classical work here, and that is King Lear by Shakespeare. So I didn't really read a lot of Shakespeare, not at university neither. I think I had to read Midsummer Night's Dream, not even sure, when I was in Cambridge for summer school, but I think I kind of avoided Shakespeare throughout my university career, and so I haven't read a lot of Shakespeare. I have seen, of course, some movie adaptations of his works, and I've also seen the play for Midsummer Night's Dream at a classical musical festival, but I definitely want to be getting into more of his work. So, and the book that I chose to try, and I don't even know why, is King Lear. So we'll see whether that was a good decision or not, because I actually don't know too much about it. But so I assume it's one of his tragedies, and so we'll see how I get along with this one. It's a pretty big edition, but it also has a lot of notes in it, and a lot of explanations for particular vocabulary that is being used that might not be used in the same way anymore at this point in time. Then we get to Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. If you've seen my conclusion video for 2020, like the best books of 2020, you know that my best book of 2020, or at least one of the two, was Lanny by Max Porter, so I wanted to read more about it. Which seamlessly leads me to my last book for the book haul for January, and that is Orfeo by Richard Powers, which is the author of the other book that I put as a best book for 2019, which was The Overstory. So Orfeo by Richard Powers is another book by him. I don't really remember what it's about. Yeah, it's about music a lot. It's a lot to do with music. So I feel like Richard Powers always has this sort of like theme that he puts into his books. So the overstory is very much about trees, and he used the structure of a tree to structure his work. And as I've been reading up on him, it seems like he does that with a lot of his work. So in some way, music will be probably also included into the structure or into the style of this book. So looking forward to this one as well. So that is it for my January wrap up and book haul. So let me know down below what you think of this format. Do you want me to do a separate video in which I'm talking about that? But I think that that would just be like such a short video that I'm not even sure whether it's worth it. However, I do think that this is like already the 4th time that I've pressed play on this thing, so that I already have like 40 minutes of material on this video. So yeah, this might just be too long. So let me know down below what you think of it, and definitely let me know if you've read any of those books as well, what your thoughts are on them, or if you've been very intrigued by one of them and want more information about them, let me know as well. And yeah, enjoy your day and see you guys for the next one. Bye!